There we go. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Revolving Door conversations with queer artists from the Shaw Festival about coming out and pride. And my name is Peter Hinton, and I'm the host for the day. And I wanted to welcome everyone to our Instagram takeover today. Before we begin, I wanted to say that the Shaw Festival gratefully acknowledges that its operations are established on land that has been inhabited by Indigenous peoples for millennia. In particular, we recognize and thank the Neutral Nation, the Anishinaabeg Nation, and the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Recognition of the important contributions of Indigenous peoples is consistent with the Shaw's commitment to making the promise of truth and reconciliation real in our communities. The Shaw also wishes to thank all Canadians and visitors to the area for their ongoing and important roles in the caretaking of the lands and waters and our continued obligation and responsibility to this work. Important honoring and truth, especially today. Our first conversation today is with Ryan Cunningham, and I'm really thrilled to welcome Ryan here to the Revolving Door. And Ryan is a status pending Nehayahi Cree from Edmonton, whose family comes from the Michelle Band First Nation. And Ryan has been an actor, a producer, he's a director, a manager, event creator for over 25 years. His company, Cunningham Concepts and Creations, produces and tours award-winning productions, including Half, written and performed by Cliff Cardinal, which was originally produced by Native Earth Performing Arts under the artistic direction of Ryan. And Ryan has acted with Crow's Theatre, with the Citadel, and memorably to our audiences here at the Shaw in The Madness of King George, Grand Hotel, and Octoroon, and oh, what a lovely war. And Ryan has been a treasured collaborator of mine for many, many years. And so I welcome you, Ryan. Thank you so much. And it's great to have you here today to talk.
Thank you, Peter. It's so great to be here.
So let's open the door. Let's unpack this door, this revolving door.
Yeah, let's do that. And let's first give our thoughts and prayers to the people in Cowessess First Nation in Saskatchewan. And to all of the First Nations and all of the communities that will uncover more of these truths about the history of Canada and the traumatizing experience First Nations have had in the creation of this nation state.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's a lot to
Yeah.
unpack, isn't there? Like that's been sort of a key word in our own conversations is what we unpack in a
Yeah.
land acknowledgement, what we unpack in pride, what we
Mm.
unpack queer, and an idea that's sort of guiding us through this conversation is this notion Mae West had about the revolving door, that coming out, being truthful, isn't about being in one box and going into another or the search for one label over another, but is like a circle, is going in and out. And so we're unpacking, what does it mean to be queer? What does it mean to be Canadian, Indigenous, how we identify?
That's
And
what I love about that analogy of the revolving door is It's an analogy to the medicine wheel teachings that we have in First
Ah,
Nations culture as well, which is an analogy to the seasons of the world and the earth and the cycles that they all have and we all have. And
mm,
that's it's such an interesting concept of it's an interesting modern concept of these millennia old beliefs, theories, traditions, and teachings.
mhm.
Uh, that it's always a cycle, and there are distinct phases in the cycle, and every rotation of the cycle, we hopefully learn something, and then repeat. um,
Yeah,
which in a, and the concept of a circle is two-dimensional, but it's also like a multi-dimensional concept. So it's interesting that the revolving door lives in three-dimensional space because you could look at it also as a vortex, as a spiral that exists
mm,
in multi dimensions that deepen and expand as it turns as well. So each cycle is that. It's not a new. It's like an addition to, an
yeah,
expansive of. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I love that analogy. Yeah. And we were talking a lot about the land acknowledgement and
Yeah.
unpacking what that is. And now it's protocol
Mm,
everywhere. And in this part of Turtle Island, Ontario, it's only really sort of taken root in the last 5 years or so. In Vancouver, it started happening about 10 years ago.
mhm.
And I noticed in Australia and New Zealand, it was happening before that as well. And that was the first time I became aware of land acknowledgements. And it's become an interesting thing because yeah, it's a labeling, and it's become this protocol that has to happen. Um, but it's interesting how it's being reinterpreted
Mm,
and taken on, and um, how maybe it feels a bit like it's just something that has to get done. It can be pre-recorded and played on the speakers.
yeah.
People question, should it be Indigenous people who say it? Should it be non-Indigenous people? Should it be sung? Should it be spoken in the language? Whose language should it be spoken in? What cultures do we acknowledge?
There we go.
Um, yeah, like there's a lot to unpack when you talk about a land acknowledgement. Um, and just the term land acknowledgement is an English translation of a concept we say is indigenous. But I'd really like to ask anyone to answer who who came up with it. Like where is it from, right? Like what culture, what is right, what is wrong, who is right, what is wrong, and like even in the last year, I've heard people do their own spin and talk about, well, how do we do land acknowledgements when we're on Zoom? How do we do digital acknowledgements
Right.
in the digital space? Um, I've heard people say, well, since it's called a land acknowledgement, we have to acknowledge the land and pollution and how we're destroying the land and environment um, and then interesting political twists as well.
Totally, totally. And you know, go ahead.
Well, and just uh, I even heard someone recently say a non-Indigenous colleague was told, well, by someone who said they knew what a land acknowledgement was and said, well, I'm not going to tell you. You have to do your own work to find out what that means. And that to me was very confusing. It very much confused my
Mm,
colleague as well. And I had a beautiful teaching from our friend and colleague Billy Morasti,
mm,
who explained it in such a beautiful way.
Billy.
And Billy, um, he said he started, of course, it started with a story, and the teaching was a story. And um, back in the day, let's say before settlers arrived from Europe, uh, as indigenous people would travel through other indigenous territories, you would stop before you came into their territory, and there would be a runner that we call that would come and say, "Whoa, who's coming on here?" And you would stop so you could communicate what you were doing there. Are you asking permission to hunt? Are you asking permission to travel through? Are you asking permission to come talk, to go into treaty, to um, go into war, whatever? And the protocol was that you acknowledged this was their territory, and so you acknowledged them and your presence and respected them and their territory and their protocols there. And Billy explained that it was like coming into someone's house. You wouldn't just walk through someone's door, sit on the couch, and start going through the fridge. You acknowledge that it's their
Right.
territory,
Right.
and you ask them permission, and you acknowledge their protocols, their ways of being, the food in their fridge, what they want to share with you.
Yeah.
Um, and that was a beautiful analogy for me about a land acknowledgement, because I've heard people sort of turn it into something about them and their experience and or their, you know, whatever. Where I love the teaching that it's about acknowledging and honoring the people who are there, and and it's when we gather. That's sort of in the modern interpretation. When we gather in a place or a conference, a theater, a festival, we acknowledge the place we are in, and that is the modern interpretation of coming into someone's territory and acknowledging their protocols.
Yeah. It's such a powerful teaching, because it's really simple and really
Mm.
deep. Like it's really profound too. But
Like
it's
a
just
medicine wheel.
like a lot of medicines are, right?
Yeah.
Um, it's so interesting when I think about you in this conversation because you come at it from so many different lived experiences, culturally, um, artistically. Like you're currently spending a lot of time thinking about technologies being part of the BMO lab at Canadian Stage, where you're exploring different technologies for the theater. That you're an actor, you're a writer, you direct, you produce, you do a lot of things. So you're holding a lot of distinct experiences towards a unity of them. And a few years ago, you wrote an essay for a publication of queer works, Q to Q, called "To Spirit or Not to Spirit? Is it even a question?" And I'm wondering if you could speak a bit to that, because in it, you, I think, make a really great offer to us to how to think about two-spirited folks and its connection and disconnection from what we think of as queer or what we think of as being straight or gay or those kinds of binaries.
Yeah. And you know, these teachings really started when I saw the play Agukwe,
Mm.
written and performed by Wabate Fobister, directed and dramaturged by Ed Roy, originally produced by Buddies in Bad Times Theater. And it had it was the first time I heard the concepts and the teachings of Two Spirit, which is a very common teaching in many First Nations around the world and Indigenous peoples around the world before a Euro-Christian um, worldview created the binary of male and female and hetero and non-hetero. Because and yeah, it was so, and I've seen other Indigenous people see the play as well and have the exact same experience I did, where growing up, I knew the concept of straight didn't fit, the concept of gay didn't fit. I went to a performing arts high school. Many of my friends, if not most, came out of the closet transitioned by the time we graduated, and and I was completely open to many different kinds of relationships when I had and when I had a connection with someone spiritually. That's that's what
Mm.
meant for me. So this concept of gay or straight, and then of course bi, uh, it didn't fit for me because I was like, well, I don't want to just have sex with everyone. And actually, the people I want to be with, it's not because I just want to have sex with them. So I'm really confused by these categories that are
Yeah.
based on sexual preference and also gender identity. And and then a good friend, colleague, Patrick O'Reilly, who was the manager at the Roost in Edmonton for decades, he's like, "Oh, you're just bent." I was like, "Wow, bent. Yeah, I like that. That works. Yeah, like I can go with that." Uh, and then I started hearing the teachings, the Two Spirit teachings, and then I started and then I met an elder of mine, a Two Spirit elder, Harlan Pruden, who is from Alberta, from northern Alberta. He's Cree as well. He was the advisor to Barack Obama on all things AIDS and queer and Two Spirit
Wow.
related.
Mm.
And now he's getting his PhD in UBC in Vancouver on Two Spirit. And he gifted me so many more teachings. And I started learning more about my culture, my Cree culture, and how, like many, we we said there were seven genders, and gender's the English translation of this concept. And they're what we know. They're male straight, they're male gay, they're female straight, female gay, asexual, bisexual, and transsexual. And those those were considered sort of genders in the culture, meaning they existed. There was also the concept that there was fluidity between them. And how I've been taught is and I love visuals.
Yeah.
It's a spectrum. It's a spectrum that we all exist on and we move through. And what I love about it is that we get to honor each of us in the spectrum because we're necessary. As Wawate said in Agukwe, we didn't waste people. We honor and love our hetero men, our males, our warriors. We need them. We need them in our communities just as much as we need our feminine men, just as much as we need our warrior women. Everyone has a place and everyone has a special place and contributes, and we need them. And I love that because it just means we honor who we are, and being feminine or masculine doesn't threaten each other either in our
Yeah.
roles.
Yeah. There's a beautiful story you share in your essay about Agukwe, which is how a critic in Edmonton responded to it. And you
Oh yeah.
could describe Agukwe and say it's a coming out play. It's about a young person who comes out.
Yep.
And didn't the critic sort of imply, oh, we've seen this story a million times before? And
Yeah.
you made a beautiful observation about that and in regard to how audiences responded to it. Could you talk about
Yeah. Sure. I mean, there were Indigenous audience members that would just start bawling with joy
that?
in it. There was a cultural keeper, a knowledge keeper, and an elder from a neighboring community who was homophobic, and Christianity brought huge amounts of homophobia to our communities, and and he came, didn't want to, but wanted to support us, and was also crying at the end of it, and learned teachings that he didn't know, um, and then demanded that we bring the play back to his community the next year, which we did. And he asked if he could speak before the show and talk about the importance of it. And like it changed people's lives. Like it changed my lives. These teachings really do. And
Absolutely.
And I want to thank you too, because you supported us so much in producing it
Yeah.
and helping us when you're at the NAC.
Wow.
Uh, and you did. And it was, and what I love about the story about the critic who didn't understand the importance and just said, "Oh yeah, yeah, it's a good show. It's just another coming out show, but it's good." It without without the indigenous context, you don't understand the power of it. You don't understand the teachings. You don't understand the layers, like the medicine wheel, the teachings
Yeah.
underneath just the coming out story, and uh, and that to me was a reflection because when I was writing that paper that year, the City Hall of Toronto announced they were adding 2S to LGBTQ and all their
Right.
communications, which would, I guess, now be LGBTQ TIP plus. Um, and it, to me, that was the exact same thing of what this critic said. When you take a concept, an indigenous teaching or a story, or a category like 2S, a people like 2S, and you just frame it in a Euro-Western framework or concept like
Yeah.
LGBTQ, then you actually take out anything that's indigenous from it because you're putting it in a Euro-Western framework. And in LGBTQ, that is a Euro framework of categories and labels based on sexual preference and gender identity. Being two-spirit has nothing to do with sexual preference or gender identity. It's about the spirit, the masculine and the feminine spirit. It's about embodying and having on
Mm.
that spectrum the masculine and feminine.
Mm.
And so when you take 2S out of an indigenous framework, you put it in the communications letterhead from City Hall of Toronto saying LGBTQ2S, you actually take everything indigenous out of it because there's no indigenous framework. It's not in an indigenous framework. And so people who don't know just say, "Oh, yeah, they're Native people who are queer." Like, well, yes, that is part of
Yeah.
it, but it actually diminishes anything that's indigenous about it. Uh,
Wow.
and that was such an interesting analogy to see that, like, to see it, yeah, like to see this critic and be like, wow, yeah, that's the same as this concept
Yeah.
of taking it out of context.
Yeah.
And
Or,
and
or,
and
yeah.
how I love to explain it is it's having the when we're in kindergarten we have the piece of wood that has a circle hole and a square hole and you've got a peg and a square thing. It's
Yeah.
like you're trying to put the square in the circle and the circle in the square and it doesn't work. And guess what? They don't have to fit in each other's holes. They can
Wow.
exist in their own holes and they should exist in their own holes. But we can exist, our holes can exist side by side.
So I guess it's a lot about how to embrace this spectrum you describe, because distinction within the spectrum is really important too, for sure. Like there
Mm-hmm.
are experiences and privileges that each of us come to celebrating Pride. Um, and that's what I really love in your provocation. And Q to Q, for the folks listening, is a wonderful collection of plays with excellent thoughts in it, and Ryan's is one of them that's in it. So just Google it, look it up. You can find out how to access it because it's a great collection. And it makes me think about, you know, I read recently, a couple of years ago, somebody posting online that the problem with Pride is that it's become too political. And you go, well, wait a minute.
uh, do you remember how it started?
Precisely. And what a lot of your thoughts and teachings have for us is a way of looking at the whole spectrum and seeing where we are distinct and seeing where we are shared. And that to me is really interesting because we can so easily create closets or boxes, even with the best of intention, and
Hmm.
end up not looking at experience holistically. So I
Yeah.
love the offer of thinking about a land acknowledgement and coming out as a related thing, not as, well, Indigenous life is over here and queer life is over there and straight people are over like that. Where do we intersect and meet?
Yeah, and we do intersect and meet,
Yeah.
even in our own identities. Um, and yeah, it's so interesting how the idea of pride and people questioning where it's political, because I feel like that's where land acknowledgements are going. They're becoming political.
Hmm.
Who's got the best land acknowledgement? Who is the right land acknowledgement? Who's
Right, right.
how many land acknowledgements do you have to write and give your staff options to choose which one they want to?
Yeah. And where are we actually engaged in it? Like really feeling it, like,
Well, and who is it for?
aha.
Where is it said in? What is the context? Like, uh, just to circle back to the land acknowledgement, it's in the Shaw Land Acknowledgement, and I've heard it from other organizations around the Great Lakes and Toronto, where and in Shaw's Land Acknowledgement option number 2, the first nation they recognize is the neutral nation. And I remember the first time I heard that, I was so confused. Um, but I didn't question, because it's a land acknowledgement. Who am I to question land acknowledgements? And a nation, in a land acknowledgement. And then the first year I was at Shaw, one of the first things, like very early, I went to the museum just around the corner from the Shaw Festival Theatre.
Yes.
Checked it out, and they have sort of an Indigenous corner, and they talk about the history of the area. And one of the first things they say is one of the first Europeans to come to that territory was a French Jesuit priest, as they were. And he was there to scope out resources, land, actual resources, and spiritual resources, because that's how they perceived people as well. Um, and and his, I believe his diary is there in the museum, or they have a copy of it. And they say, yeah, I mean, what he said was he came to Niagara on the Lake, what it's called now, and he saw all these different nations that were speaking different languages, and they were all neutral. Whatever that French word, neutral, or whatever, that I believe is a reference to. They weren't aggressive. They weren't adversarial to each other. They were living neutrally with each other. And I thought that was so odd that that has now become a label for pan-Indigenous tribes that existed in the area. And like it's also such a perfect analogy to how colonization literally categorizes the world and then documents it in their language on a piece of paper, and then it becomes fact that is just accepted without question of where it comes from.
Right.
Just like pride. And people questioning it being political, well, shouldn't you be questioning about where it comes from? Where did pride start? Where was it? Who was there? Who were the people there?
Yeah.
What were they saying? What language were they speaking? What arguments were they making? And rather than just accepting it for what it is now, as a TD Bank funded, Toronto Police Department funded Superfund party, which it is.
Right.
But uh, but we need to acknowledge where it comes from.
Yeah.
Just like a land acknowledgement. We need to
Yeah.
acknowledge where it comes from.
Yeah. See, I just respond to this with my whole heart because it invites connection. It invites learning distinct truths, histories, lived experiences different from our own, and how we might all fit together. Like, a thing, you have so taught me about is, how anxious Canadian settlers get for reconciliation, but haven't unpacked all the truth. And, like there's the eagerness to get to resolve without really looking at the truth first and thoroughly.
It's interesting. Yeah,
Because it like
that's a
isn't coming out really about being your truest self. Like, isn't it about a way of entering our communities with our truest selves?
yeah, yeah. But there's a lot to unpack with that, like for myself as well.
Yeah,
I didn't even know how, like, I didn't know how to come out. I didn't know what it was, I
yeah,
didn't know what the truths, I didn't know what the teachings were.
yeah.
I had to live the experience to understand it and find community, find elders, find mentors to help
Mm,
teach me.
mm. And
And
who are some of those mentors? Who are some of those elders that guided you?
well, I mentioned two of them, Harlan Pruden, of course,
Yeah.
uh, and Patrick O'Reilly. Oh my God.
Oh my God.
He was the manager of the Roost, which was I believe was the longest running gay bar in Edmonton. And then after like 25 years, he decided to start his own bar in 1995. And he said, you know what? I'm not going to call it a gay bar. I'm going to staff it with all of my friends from the
Mm,
Roost, and it's going to be a venue that used to be this like weird straight college bar called Club Malibu, and it was an old funeral home, so he called it 109 Discotheque because it was on 109th Street.
yeah.
Um, and I was 18 and started theater school and started working there. And actually another mentor who I didn't meet until later in life, but knew all about as I grew up was Brad Fraser as well.
Oh, sure. Edmonton. Yes.
Yeah. So I started working at Chianti's, Italian cafe and restaurant, um, about 6 months after Brad Fraser left, I guess. And
Legendary. This bar, for folks that don't know, is just a legendary place for theater folks, for queer folks, for a lot of people in Edmonton at the time, eh?
Yeah, it is.
Chianti.
And Chianti's, they were great for artists because they would let you like leave when you got a contract for 2 months and then just come back. Uh,
Sure. Yeah.
of course. And so, yeah, my first day of high school was my first day working there, and then I started reading Brad Fraser's plays and seeing
Yeah.
him. Um, and you, of course, Peter, have been a very
Oh, oh,
important mentor to me as well.
oh.
Hmm.
Wow. Um, you had like an ongoing rapport with Brad, right? When you were at Native Earth too.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Brad in your piece, and I know he's an important artist, and I
Mm.
know Sky Gilbert is an important artist, and I know
Yeah.
Daniel David Moses and Thompson Highway, of course, amongst many. But do you want to talk a little bit about those writers and that work a bit that you love, what you love about it, or what moves you in it?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's a quote that Thompson Highway said in a Now magazine, I'm sure, from when I was researching his work. And somebody asked him about I think it was one of the characters in the Res Sisters who's a lesbian, and he's like, oh, you put in why do you something like the question was something like why do you put queer characters in your plays or what is that from or whatever. He's like, well, I'm Cree. And I'm talking about Cree people. So there will be queer people in it because that's just they're in our community. It's like, yeah, it's just what
Yeah,
is. And actually, that's an interesting um,
it's
correlation
true.
with,
You think about like Emily Dictionary and Rose Sisters.
yeah,
Like she's queer and she's out and she's proud and she's there. But there's no sort of scene where she confronts being queer with the other women or uh
nobody
there's
cares. She just is.
she is and she don't care. Like she is so assertive in that pride and that expression.
Yeah, I'm adapting a play called Inspiration Point by John Garfield
Mm,
Barlow for Theatre New Brunswick, and he's Mi'kmaq
mm,
from New Brunswick. And it was a play that I workshopped at Native Earth as a young actor like 15 years ago. That always stuck with me, and it's about three guys who get stuck in a field, and just dawned on me a few years ago. Uh, how great it would be if one of the characters, if we had a female voice in it. And so I sort of looked at the script again,
mm,
and one of the characters, I said, well, this character should just be a woman. And they talk about girls, and girls are attracted to.
mm, mm.
And what I love about the adaptation is that nothing in the script has changed, and none of the characters question that one of the characters is a woman who also is attracted to women. Like it just doesn't matter. Like it's not a something that needs to be questioned or talked about. It just is.
Wow.
And
That
it
is
works so well.
and that will that be performed soon or like is that a plan for the future for that?
Yeah, that's the plan. So we did a Zoom reading of it last fall, and Natasha, the artistic director at Theatre New Brunswick, is yeah, she wants to produce it. Jeremy Webb at Neptune Theatre. He
Wow.
also is
Wow.
very interested in potentially co-producing it with Theatre Brunswick. And I'd like to acknowledge the National Arts Center Indigenous Office gifted us with a summer residency grant to continue adapting the script this summer.
Oh,
And so,
fantastic.
yeah, yeah.
Fantastic. I should mention to our folks that are listening that I neglected at the top to let you know that Ryan and I are having this conversation and will. And you're welcome to, if you have a question you wanted to post for Ryan, feel free to use the chat to do so. And I'll do my best to DJ the chat line and the conversation at the same time. Um, this is an interesting one that's sort of connected to what we've just been discussing, which is about your experience at the Shaw and working on a range of stuff from something that was devised in a way with a What a Lovely War, and you contributed content towards the show, very beautifully, I might add, and to a queer work playing a non-queer character, an octoroon, Brandon Jacob Jenkins, or The Madness of George III,
Mm.
Alan Bennett. There's a
Hmm.
queer writer too, but the subjects of the plays themselves aren't necessarily or explicitly queer. To Grand Hotel, which has an interesting connection in your own life,
Yeah,
and the reality that the Shaw has never done an Indigenous work in their repertoire.
yeah.
So we really, really want to support and encourage the Shaw to do so. So I'm curious about
Hmm.
what your experience of the Shaw was with this and the plays that you did. And what are the plays the Shaw should do? What are the Indigenous Two-Spirit works that you'd love to see at the Shaw Festival?
Well, Daniel David Moses
Okay.
is unfortunately one of the most important, least produced playwright I think in Canada,
Yeah.
who
And
passed
from
from this
here, like
physical
from
world.
nearby, where the Shaw is, yeah. Or
Yep,
Brantford,
Six
yeah.
Nations.
Six Nations.
Um, and just brilliant poet as well as playwright.
Yeah.
Whose work, yeah, like is kind of like I feel transcends theater because it feels poetic when you read, like you can read it as poetry as well as dramatic theater. Um, his show, the Indian Medicine Shows, is outstanding. And actually, I know the mandate of Shaw has evolved and shifted
Yeah.
recently, but it would have worked in the mandate actually in the past couple of decades,
It could
um,
work. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
because it exists in sort of the turn of the century, sort of Wild West, um, and it uh, much like Oscar Wilde. Um,
I totally, I know what you mean.
his work can be seen at a certain level, and also when you, I guess, look for the context of who wrote it and how it was written, and what their political, I guess, activist sort of
Mm,
perspectives were. You could add many more layers to it
yeah.
in terms of uh, relationships, especially gender relationships.
Mm,
Um, and
yeah,
and
yeah.
I
It's
and what I
true.
love about his plays as well is he writes plays that are situated in the past, like this, or Almighty Voice and His
Ah,
Wife, which is another brilliant
gorgeous,
play of his
gorgeous.
that Soul Pepper produced last
Yeah,
year. Um, and that there's this beautiful contemporary lens, but placed in the past.
yeah.
And I feel that what's great about it, and if you choose not to look in the layers, that's what you think can just be superficial. You're like, oh no, that was turn of the century. They're just like turn of the century people. And you're like, no, actually, they're very layered people who have many contradictory desires
Yeah.
and
See,
instincts.
it's interesting you mentioned Almighty Voice too, because Indian medicine shows, for people that don't know, is, for lack of better words, two one-act plays, right? That are different, but they're
Mm,
very related. They're meant to be together. They're not just conveniently attached to each other to make a full night.
yep,
And Daniel plays with narrative in really surprising ways of things you
yeah,
think you know, but don't. He'll flip the perspective on who's telling the story, who's impacted by that story. And
yep,
in medicine shows, he's playing upon a story a lot of us already know, which is the kind of myth of Billy the Kid.
hmm,
And
yep,
they're so two spirited in every way. Like he's playing with
yeah.
it. I remember a friend of mine at the intermission of Almighty Voice being, I don't know what's going on here. I don't know if I like, and then having their head turned around with the second act because it impacts both. It's a very interesting
It is.
dramaturgy.
I remember when I was artistic director at Alberta Aboriginal Performing Arts, which I co-founded with Christine Sakimo Frederick in Edmonton 11 years ago. Native Earth had produced Almighty Voice, directed by Michael Gray Eyes, and it was and they wanted us to present it, and so they sent the video, the VHS tape, I believe it was, and um, I remember like watching it, and then after the intermission, I literally thought they had mixed up the tapes. I was like, "What is this? Is it a different like? Is this a like?" I literally thought it was a different show.
Wow.
And
Wow.
and then of course, and that's what he does. He plays with you and your perceptions in that way, and then it all just kind of comes crashing down on you, and you understand it. It's so cool.
Oh yeah. And the connections are so amazing. Like when the other day we were talking about the neutral nation and this term and where it comes from. And I was immediately reminded of Daniel, his play Brebeuf's Ghost,
Mm.
which is set in 1649 amongst the Huron. It's about the black robes in there, and yet he calls it like a tragedy of pain. And talk
Mm.
about truth and reconciliation, to really unpack that truth. And when I think of, the number of times I hear Canadian, like settler people saying, "Oh, there's never been a war on Canadian soil," then, is denial. It's
Well,
just like,
yeah.
that's the colonized reality within the mind.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And it's it's tough. It's really, really hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I understand when people get upset, um, that people don't know. I also
Mm,
understand why people get upset that they don't know,
mm,
and that guilt and shame that we don't. And
yeah.
uh, it's hard
Yeah.
for everyone. And that is the truth, and that is the pain. There's a brilliant um, the quote at the beginning of Thompson's um, Dry Lips is I'm not sure if I'll get every word correct,
Mm,
but the healing can't begin until the poison is removed.
mm, mm,
And uh, the poison is what happened. Like, it's the truth. We
yeah.
can't heal until we know the truth, because that is what is continuing to traumatize us,
Yeah.
continuing to poison us, is this truth that is not known. And once it's known, we can all heal. I heard an elder talk about it from
Yeah.
out east, saying how you know um, the healing has really only started to happen like in a society context in the last like 10 years or so,
Mm,
because finally uh, non-Indigenous people are understanding, are knowing, and learning the truth. And we're finally at a place where we can talk about the truth. Barely, like barely. We just had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, like just. And there are still people that don't know about it or don't understand that the last residential school closed in 1996. That
mm,
I have friends that are my age that were taken from their families and put in residential schools.
yeah.
It's not in the past. It's not ancient history. It's now. And this trauma is real,
Mhm.
and we're all going through it now. And we're finally at a place where we can talk about it, I guess, 'cause it's been 25 years since that last one closed. Uh, and you know, it takes a long time
Yeah.
to
And,
process.
and how those stories continue to live in us, and by casting light to them, by staging them, by following the great spirit of Daniel David Moses or Brad Fraser or Ryan Cunningham or Brandon Jacob Jenkins or Alan Bennett. Like, there is healing that comes with that poison coming to the
Yeah,
fore. Yeah, yeah. That's where theater can be so, so powerful. I
it's storytelling.
Yeah. I remember when we were working on Oh What a Lovely War, and you told the story of Francis Peggy-Magabo, the most decorated sniper in World War One. Uh, the irony or the splitness of him being acknowledged as the most decorated, and yet having no status in the country he was representing,
Yeah,
and what peace might have meant to him in 1919 and the wars that were coming. Like, why do you think it's important we tell these stories of the past, and how do they speak to us today, do you think?
Well, they tell us where we come from, who
Yeah.
we are, um, who we are as a nation. It's like that was one of the biggest lessons I learned when I was in. I got to spend 10 days in Berlin about
Oh,
7 years ago, and to walk around that city and see the plaques of the Holocaust and the
yeah.
things that happened there, that they acknowledge that that is part of their history as a country, as a people,
Mm,
that they have to acknowledge it. It's part of their identity, and it must be known to move forward and to learn and to
mm,
never do go back to what that was. And
yeah, yeah.
if you don't own it as part of your history and identity, then you risk it happening again
Right.
because you don't learn the lessons
Yeah.
that our ancestors are teaching us through their experience.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
it's like, and that's what we're going through right now with the residential schools. Like when I was walking through Berlin and you look at those plaques, I took pictures of them all, and every one I'm like, you could take the word Jewish out and put Indigenous, and those plaques could be anywhere in Canada of what happened.
Yeah, yeah. Wow.
And we need to acknowledge that as part of our identity, and it's going to be hard. It's not easy. Uh,
Mm,
and that's the point. That's why it means so much. We have to acknowledge it's part of our identity. We have to understand this is part of our past. We have to know that this is what makes us who we are now as a people, as a country, as a nation. That we're made up of many different experiences, and some
yeah.
are painful. We're not just the happy, like it's very political and great to, this iconic image of Canada and what it is. Um, but I think that negates actually some really cool aspects of who we are as a nation and what we could be
Yeah.
by
Yeah.
owning this history, by owning it and being better.
Which is another interesting sort of paradox or double or two-spirit idea that in purging that pain, there is hope in that. And that's not to
Mm,
say, oh, just be hopeful and that's the tonic or that's sort of a replacement, but there's connection,
yeah,
there's
yeah.
healing.
Well, to circle back, it's like pride, man. Like you
Right.
can't forget where it came from. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean we don't have to have the great party and parade with JT in the front in his pink shirt. But uh, of course we can. But it's so important, and it makes it so much deeper, and the lessons much more richer in why we're celebrating.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Uh, I'm curious about like if you have counsel for two-spirited youth who might be
Mm.
listening today, or even I mean it's a little hokey, but I like it. I do like the idea of the letter to your 15-year-old self. Like if you could talk to Ryan pre-Chianti's, what might you advise them or remind them of, or what teachings do you have that you would want to pass on to young people today?
Mm. I mean, I feel very I'm kind of jealous of young people today because it just seems like they have access to so much, and which is
Mm,
so amazing, right? Like so much information, so many mentors, so much pride, like but of course we all struggle with a lot of things when we're young. I You don't have to know
yeah,
right now. You don't
right.
have to know.
Yeah, it's such
That's
a
what
pressure, eh? Yeah.
that's what life is for you to figure it out. And you don't need to know right away. Because and I also think uh you'll you might discover something completely new
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah,
that
yeah.
no one else has yet.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. See, I love that. And
Hmm.
that's part of the revolving door, right? It's not about being out and then being in, or being closeted and being free. Like, it's not about a jail. It's
Mm.
about that evolution, the spiral. I love that. Not
Yeah.
knowing. So I think we often feel so pressured to know, to be
Yes. Oh my.
certain.
And like I remember in high school, it's like grade 10. All right, what are you going to do in university? What's going to be your career? I'm like, what?
Yeah.
I'm like,
One of my,
I don't even know if I'm straight or gay.
oh, I think one of my like lesser proud moments as a educator, I asked a group of teenagers what their 5-year plan was. And they just looked at me like, dude, I'm just trying to get through the weekend. Like, five
Yeah.
year plan, I don't know, which is a great reminder about the possibility of change within us.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Not knowing, as you say.
Hmm.
Beautiful. Like, Ryan, the hour has just whizzed by so quickly.
Yeah, it always does.
It always does. Are there any final thoughts you would like to share or ask? Yeah,
Mm.
one of our people have commented with that discovery and not knowing is always part of it. And Sherida Eswar, she still doesn't know what her 5-year plan is. Oh,
Mm.
Sherida. Are
Mm.
there any thoughts you'd like to leave with us today? Or
Yeah, that I think this. I'll repeat it, but not for the 15-year-olds, but for us.
yeah,
We don't know.
mm,
We don't know how to navigate this right now. No one's been here before.
right.
No one. There's no handbook on how to get through mass graves.
Mm, mm,
There's no handbook to get through incarceration for your sexual preference or gender.
mm,
And one thing I've been trying to remind myself throughout these crazy 16 months of the pandemic is and I have to keep on reminding myself to just
yeah,
be
gender.
gentle with each other. It's easy to not be, and we're all going through so much.
Mm,
That's
mm,
good. It's been really good for myself to remind myself to just be gentle with each other
yes.
because we don't know how to go through this stuff.
Yeah,
And we're just
and
figuring it
to
out.
know where we have each other, community
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
fellowship in that way is really so vital.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, Ryan, I thank you so much for being with us this morning and starting our day
Thank
on
you,
this
Peter.
day in particular too. And I send out such great gratitude and love. And follow Ryan Cunningham, folks. He's up to a lot of really cool stuff, and I'm so honored that I get to continue in that, to work with you
Thank you,
and
Peter.
be with you. I learn so much
Just
from you every day, and I love you very much.
I love you too, Peter. Thank you. This was such an honor, such a
Oh,
gift. Thank you, Shaw
beautiful.
Festival,
Right on.
and have an awesome day.
Yes, and I hope Ryan is in Kingston right now on the
Yeah.
road. On the road on a
Unexpected.
motorcycle.
Yeah.
I wish you safe travels
Thank
home.
you. Thank
Okay.
you. Have an
Love you,
awesome
Ryan.
day. Love you
You
too.
too. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye. How do I turn this off?
I know, I did the same thing.